You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Kathy Levin. We're going to talk about diabetes and taking control of your sugar levels. She's a medical dietitian, a certified diabetes educator. Some of the acronyms after her name, I don't know what they are, so I'll have her describe them. But it looks like quite a few accolades in the diabetes world. So, Kathy, if you would, just tell me a bit about your background in diabetes and what got you interested in it.
Sure. So, as you said, I'm a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. I'm board certified in lifestyle medicine, which I always say is the science of controlling the controllables. Things like eating well, moving more, stressing less, connecting with other people, getting good sleep, not smoking, not drinking too much, all the things that raise inflammation in our body and contribute to chronic disease. I always say, my joke, or I look back as a kid, the first experience I ever had with diabetes is I had an uncle that had diabetes. And I specifically remember one time that we were over at my aunt and uncle's house and there were donuts in the kitchen and I yelled, "Oh, donuts!" And which promptly got me a little smack. And that is how I remember, like, there was such a negative connotation to people with diabetes having anything like that when I was a kid. And I think that's one of the things that I remember. And I think the thing that really got me going is just as a dietitian was when I would see how hard it was for people living with diabetes to just try to live and not feel the guilt and shame like they feel like they brought that onto themselves. That was probably my entrance point.
Why do they criticize you for being excited about donuts? Did you have diabetes as a kid?
No, they didn't want my Uncle Bob to hear that we had donuts because they were afraid he would go out and eat it. Yeah. So I just think that always like stuck in the back of my head as I grew up.
I understand. Yeah, no, it's one thing to not eat that stuff and not have it in the house. And it's another thing to have it in the house. And it's another level for someone to eat it in front of you and you're like, "Argh."
Right. Exactly.
I understand. So you're an educator. Do you deal with people with type 2 or type 1 or both?
So both. But because the majority of people that have diabetes, about 95% have type 2, that would be the majority of the people that I see all the time. That and the unfortunate growing population of people with pre-diabetes. Even myself last year, when my number was checked, was in the first tiny little notch over. My A1C was 5.7, which is the beginning part of prediabetes. Thankfully, with drilling down a little bit further for myself, I am no longer in that category. But I mean, it happens to everybody. Right? It's just part of the process of changes in metabolism in our body as we age oftentimes too.
Well, when I was growing up, diabetes seemed to be something that would happen to people in their 50s onwards, maybe 40s. What about today? I've heard, there's the pediatric diabetes didn't even exist as a category. Like what ages do you see? All ages, or where's the bolus of it?
Right. So the majority of people are adults, but I will tell you that for a while, I worked in an endocrinology office, and it was in that period of time that when we started to see, when I was first a dietitian, you never saw a child with type 2 diabetes, and then it started to be a thing. And I think that all of it probably led from lifestyle. They say 80 to 90% of chronic disease can be prevented with lifestyle change. So I think for like kids, everything is so much more sedentary, even more so now. You look at kids have all their devices in their hands, and instead of like when I was a little kid and we were outside playing and things like that and running around. And just some of the diet choices, again, I go back to my own childhood. We very rarely ever ate out, or if we got to go to like McDonald's, it was a rare treat, as where now I think for a lot of kids, that's more the norm. And if your parents eat a certain way, you grow up eating a certain way as well.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. So do you counsel individuals, or is it now starting to become like families where one person will come and then other people in the same family? Is it turning into group counseling, or is it still individualized?
So, I mean, for the most part, is individualized. Certainly, if there are people, when I work with, especially, and this is no offense to men out there, but if it's a man can, and he doesn't feel like he's the primary person that purchases or preps the food or things like that, then oftentimes he'll bring his significant other with him, and then we'll just talk together so that everybody's on the same page. And definitely, if you have a kid with diabetes, we want parents involved with that. But ideal, like I said, mostly with adults. And so a lot of that is like decision making and different, just little tweaks that people can make to how they're eating, or if they're exercising, or they're getting, managing their stress, all those things that kind of raise that inflammation in their body. So it's very individualized for the most part, but with their support people present.
So how much do people need to reduce their sugar? Like, are there some people that need to be ultra strict in order to get results? Or, can they cut their sugar intake in half and that's enough for a lot of people? What's the range look like?
Sure. So honestly, when it comes to diabetes, it's not like in terms of eating, it has more to do with fat. Interestingly enough, they've found in the past about 15 years that there is this phenomenon called intramyocellular lipid. In other words, you have fat in your muscle tissue. Like a lot of us have heard about fatty liver, but now they recognize that it's that fat deposits actually inside people's muscle tissue that is causing the epidemic that we have now of prediabetes and diabetes. And for the most part, if we can make small changes, and that's usually my area with people, is to work on one or two small changes at each session, let them work on it for a little bit, come back, let's work on one or two more things. Oftentimes it doesn't take as much as one might think. It depends on, there's a lot of factors, right? Like if they have other illnesses or comorbidities, that can make a difference. Like if you have heart disease and you have high blood pressure and you have diabetes, which is often the case, like it can come as that metabolic syndrome kind of thing. So that if they have more things going on, sometimes we have to go a little bit further, but sometimes it's just even the difference of having somebody log their food. Let's look at it. Let's see if you're getting in enough fiber. Let's see if you have a nice balance between carbohydrate, protein, and fat. Are you getting any vegetables in? Sometimes it's just those little tiny things that can truly make the biggest difference in terms of glucose control.
Oh, so you're seeing that more than sugar intake?
Absolutely. Yeah, sugar intake is not that's not what causes diabetes. It really is that metabolic change inside somebody's body. Certainly it can exacerbate if you eat very much sugar itself, but it really is all the things that we eat. It's kind of that standard American diet or that acronym SAD that we always say. I do think sometimes it is kind of sad, but I mean, it's really the amount of like fast food and high fat things that we're having, the very highly processed meats that we're getting in, things like that. And the lack of, probably the biggest thing is the lack of whole foods like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, things like that is really if you can just switch it around a little bit and get more of those in and less of those kind of drive-through type of meals, it does make a huge difference at the end of the day.
So if someone's having 150 grams, 200 grams of sugar, maybe like 2-3 sodas, stuff like that, that does make a difference. More of a difference than eating other stuff?
No, I would say if it's like straight up sugar, like you're having regular soda all the time, that would be a first easy, simple step, right? To get rid of that, because that's just empty calories. There's not really much nutrition there. That will make a difference. And certainly depending on what somebody's glycemic control is like, that could make a huge difference. But the bigger picture is the overall like change in the way that you're eating in general, not just cutting sugar out. Because that will not, like, that might work for a little while for somebody, but if you don't make those bigger changes in terms of like your overall healthy eating pattern, it won't be sustainable for the long haul. It can make a difference initially, not for the long haul.
Well, I don't know. If I go get takeout from whatever place, I get, chicken, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. I get it from a certain place versus making it at home. What's going to be the material difference that affects someone's health? If it's not the sugar in it, what would it be?
Right. Well, like I said, the bigger thing is the fat intake that we have here in the U.S. And that's really what it does is it makes it so if that fat gets stored in our muscle tissues, that we don't have that surface area for the glucose to go into, because normally if we have excess glucose, it'll go into our muscles to be be stored for energy later on. So with the fat in there, it blocks the surface area for it to get absorbed. And therefore, then the glucose just kind of hangs out in your blood instead of doing what it's supposed to do. Because it really is like, for example, carbohydrate is not the bad guy. We need about 50 to 60% of what we eat in a day to be from carbohydrate. It really is the fuel that fuels every single cell of our body, primarily our brain, right? We need at least 130 grams of carb just to make our brain work correctly. So it's not so much the type of carbohydrate. I don't mean that. It's not so much carbohydrate, but it's the type. So like refined carbohydrates, like those things without fiber in them versus the ones that have fiber, because the fiber will help slow down the digestion and absorption of glucose into your bloodstream.
Oh, so like maybe eating an orange with all the pulp versus just orange juice.
Yeah, absolutely. That can make a huge difference. They digest in an entirely different manner because of the fiber part of it. Yeah.
So what would be a carb that's refined? Like, I don't know, if someone eats they would make baked potato, how would that be eaten in the right way versus putting all kinds of cooked garbage on it and making it okay?
No, that's where the difference lies. So the potato itself, whether it's a white potato or a sweet potato, there's nothing wrong with either one of those because they both have like good fiber, especially if you eat it with the skin on. The challenge becomes what we are putting on it, So like if you're putting a bunch of butter or you're putting a bunch of sour cream or baking bits or cheese, all those things have fat. So that's where you're sometimes going to start to see, plus it tips up the fat content, which then automatically makes the calorie content go up because we can't forget calories. They're still important, but it also adds to that risk of having more of those fatty deposits in our muscle tissue too, which then makes us not be able to absorb the glucose use it in our body like we need to for energy.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a lot of explaining, if I guess you would need a food diet or, otherwise, how do you explain to people what's a modifier?
Right. Nope. That's usually what I have people do. I have them keep a very detailed food log. I give them access to a digital food log on the platform I use with my clients. And so what we do, which is really nice on the back end of it, then there's very nice analytics. So I can show them and it gives little bar graphs to show them like, where's your fiber at? And I can show them back in time, like here's where you started out so that they can see they've done these things and it's really made a difference in what their fiber is. And then along with that, they can even log their blood glucose in that same log. So you can see, I ate this is what happened. Or sometimes we'll have people that are wearing continuous glucose monitors or biosensors where then you can really drill down and see, look, when you ate this, it didn't have as much fiber and it had more fat, and see how it made your blood sugar go up and notice where the spike was and things like that. No, it's a very valuable tool in helping people learn to modify what they're doing to improve their glucose levels.
Yeah, I worn a CGM and my wife has, and certain meals we would eat a meal and they eat the same thing just at a different restaurant and it's totally different. Like one would shoot up our sugar and the other one wouldn't. You're like, what's different about this? It's the same stuff, it looks like.
Right. Well, sometimes in the background there may be other things that they're adding into the food that could make a difference for sure. And sometimes it depends on what your starting number was. That can always make a difference. There's a lot of things that go into influencing our glucose numbers. So stress, as I always say, both emotional and physical. So like sometimes you don't know you might have a brewing infection. I had this happen to myself the last time I wore a CGM. I had been at a diabetes educators conference and they let you put them on for free. So I was wearing it and my numbers were just higher than what I would have imagined. Well, after I got home a couple of days, I found out I had COVID. So it was in that right before you're getting sick phase where your body's trying to fight it, that sometimes you'll see those numbers go up. Sometimes too, if you had a bad day, it'll make your glucose go up. Sometimes like if you've been more sedentary, like in my job, because I work remotely, I am sitting most of the day. So I have to get in little exercise breaks wherever I can. But even just sitting more can make a difference when you're looking at those continuous glucose monitor numbers for sure.
I also saw too, like my wife's would, after certain meals, hers would spike and then crash down really quick. Mine would go up and then slowly go down. So if you're sticking your finger only an hour or two after you eat, you miss all that. But if you get continuous glucose, then then it's like, so wow.
Yeah. And sometimes what the difference is, even if two people ate the same exact meal, we all are going to produce insulin differently too. So it sounds like if she went up and it came down very quickly, that she may have, I always like to say, in the land of pre-diabetes, even you'll see that happen a lot if in someone who doesn't even know their glucose is up in the background and they put one of those biosensors, because you can get those over the counter, the biosensors. It's just like the continuous glucose monitor, but you don't have to have a prescription. But so anybody can get them nowadays. It's been about, I think, a little bit over a year now that they've had those on the market where anybody could get them. But when you're wearing it, it just makes you so much more aware sometimes of what I eat this and this is what happens. Or why is my number shooting up and crashing down? Well, sometimes it's you just made more insulin because your body's still doing what it's supposed to, and that's what you want. But in that early, before you would even call it pre-diabetes, you might still see, like if they did a fasting blood glucose, your number might look fine. But wearing the CGM, you might see those like blood excursions where it goes high like that, and then it comes back down.
So what do you recommend everyone you work with use a CGM, or is it only for advanced cases?
I would say, well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's just for advanced cases. I've had several people that they are exhibiting symptoms of pre-diabetes, and I will have them go get one and wear it just so we could see what their numbers are really doing in the background. Oftentimes, like people that struggle to lose weight, they're not diagnosed with pre-diabetes or diabetes. If they have hyperinsulinemia, in other words, their insulin level's high, it's harder to lose weight because your body's working like in overdrive to bring that glucose down. So the more insulin we have in our system, the harder it is sometimes to lose weight because it's helping your body absorb it all. And it kind of is overly efficient almost in that way. So yeah, sometimes people without diabetes, I wouldn't say everyone, it's not for everyone. I think some people, and to be quite honest, the first time I ever wore a CGM, I would say that I got number fatigue because looking at those numbers all the time can start to wear on you. And you look at it, it's almost like how some people, when they weigh themselves on the scale, that those numbers like make them feel a certain negative way. Sometimes with the CGMs, it can have that same effect on people. So it's just a matter of knowing the right person, knowing if that's a technology that for them is going to be helpful versus harmful is the way that I would put it. And I think for me, wearing it occasionally has helped me understand that even better.
How long should people wear a CGM once they get it? Like, do they wear it forever, or is it just to learn how to manage themselves the first few months?
Sure. Well, it really depends on the person. So each CGM is good for 15 days. So you put it on and then you wear it for 15 days. And usually it's a good idea after that 15 days for somebody to review that, like a medical person to review it, whether it's your dietitian or doctor or nurse practitioner, to kind of go over the numbers. Because if the numbers are going to drive whether or not a practitioner would think, hey, they probably need to still wear this versus is it okay for them to not do that all the time and then maybe go to finger sticking less frequently type of thing too. I would say it's very individualized and you have to kind of customize it based on what that person's blood glucose looks like and what their goals are too.
When do people tend to fall off the wagon? Is it hard in the very beginning or after a few months, or what do you see?
You mean in terms of eating or just doing all the things you have to do to care for living with safety? I would say, I don't think there is one right answer to that. I would say most people there is not even most people. I would say some people, they're very hesitant, to even get started. It's a scary process to be told that you have diabetes, but sometimes people will get going and they'll have that support right in the beginning. The lucky thing for me is I can contract with two different companies. And so I'm able to see people for longer because of that. And I always say, even in my private practice, I want to see people for at least 6 sessions, which usually are every other week, so that it will last them 3 months. Because if you can help shore that foundation up for someone, then they're going to be set off to success and not want to give up. And it gives them a chance to see they are actually in control of their diabetes. The diabetes is not in control of them. So it depends depends on like what was their experience. Were they given a chance to meet with a diabetes educator or a dietitian? I do think that those things are critical. It's actually part of, like, if you look at the little algorithms that both the Endocrine Society and the American Diabetes Association put out, at the very top of the algorithm, it always says diet and lifestyle change. But I don't always think that's where everybody starts. I think people get put on medication relatively quickly, and sometimes that very first box gets skipped over. So I think it's harder if you weren't ever given that opportunity to meet with someone and have that support and accountability person to work with over time. It's a lot harder to do it on your own. And I would say those people probably either don't really get very far, or they get started and then they don't see the results and they kind of give up without support.
Well, what do the medications do to, if someone's on metformin or whatever it is, does it make it harder to make dietary changes or other changes to help themselves, or easier? What's their role that you see?
I think that it just works in conjunction. I wouldn't say that it makes it harder or easier. I think sometimes you'll see your numbers come down quicker. So that for some people, like psychologically, it just makes you feel better. You feel like what you're doing is working. But I don't think it's like it runs parallel. That medication runs parallel. And some people, as much as some people don't want to be on meds, I think sometimes the medication is a means to an end until you have time to work on the lifestyle change, the nutrition and lifestyle change. But I think that there's a benefit to both, and both need, not everybody needs to be on medicine in the beginning, but there may be a time for some people. That's like, I know so many people who are always worried if they're told they have to start on insulin. If your numbers are high, it's much better to get your number down, and then we'll work on the other things just to keep you from getting like the long-term complications from diabetes.
Well, what's like a very high number that people should be like really worried about right away versus like just concerned?
Sure. Well, I would say, honestly, if you find that your numbers are in the 200s consistently, and you would really have to be testing to be able to know that, but if you're in the 200s consistently, action needs to be taken one way or the other. Like to start, whether it's starting, work with the dietitian, the diabetes educator, they might put them on metformin or something like that. But in the perfect world, it would be a combination of those things. I've seen people who have had numbers on, like, the first time they knew they had diabetes, where it was well into like between 700 and 1,000 if you look at what their A1C is. And that is like urgent, like life-threatening. We need to get that taken care of. But even if you're in the 200s, you can do damage over time. I always say to people, like, sometimes people don't know you don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. And you don't know that you're feeling a certain way. Like, a lot of times they're more tired than they really even realize they are. So we get their blood glucose more in the normal range. And now all of a sudden they have all this energy because glucose is going into the cell for energy. So sometimes you don't know it until you actually know what the numbers are and then do something to help improve those numbers.
So what's like the craziest A1C or blood sugar number you've seen where you're like, oh my God?
I mean, like I said, sometimes I've seen people in the 14s. If you're in the teens, actually, if you're in double digits, that's when I'm like, oh Lord, we need to do something. So most of the time, though, those are going to be the people that obviously, if the doctor sees the number like that, they're going to do something about that right away. The challenge is oftentimes people, and I say this all the time, either people are not generally going to the doctor, which you should go once a year and have your blood work drawn so you know what your glucose is, both fasting glucose and also A1C, which is the 3-month average. You need to have that done at least once a year. For people who are elevated, every 6 months is not a bad idea. If you have diabetes, you should get your A1C done every 3 months. But knowing what those numbers are, they always say know your numbers, which applies to both glucose and cholesterol numbers. But just knowing what those numbers are is all the power in the world, so that you don't get up to that level where you're super high. But over the years, I have seen people who either weren't regular because maybe they have a little fear behind going to the doctor's office, or they may have had family members that have diabetes and they don't want to know, which I totally understand. But then we need to work with those people so that they are made to feel comfortable with it and not judged when the number is what it is, because sometimes the number is high. And then us judging as healthcare providers is not helpful, but more embracing them and being that support and accountability person is a better way to go about that. Or sometimes there's also, even in this day and age, in 2026, there's physicians that are not checking people's labs every year. It should be done. It just needs to be done. It's the only way for us to make headway, especially with prediabetes, because if we don't know it, or I've had lots of people over the years did not even know they had diabetes or prediabetes because no one said those words to them. So it's important to be an informed consumer of your healthcare, so that you know what the numbers mean, that you ask for a copy of your blood work so you know what the number is, so that you know if you need to be doing things differently, just like I did last year when mine was 5.7. I was like, I need to do something different as soon as I saw that number.
Well, what are the approximate numbers for pre-diabetes range versus diabetes?
Sure. So prediabetes is 5.7 to 6.4 if you're looking at A1C. And then it's anything greater than 6.5 for A1C is considered diabetes. So if you're below 5.7, you're in the quote unquote normal range. So those are the big ones that you always want to look at, because the problem is, while we still want fasting blood glucose, we want both those, fasting blood glucose and A1C. The A1C is probably going to give us a better idea of what your overall glucose looks like, with the exception of some people who are running high-low, like they go high and then they drop low. Sometimes it falsely can look, because it's an average, it can falsely look more in the normal range sometimes, or not as high as it really is getting.
What are some signs if someone thinks that something's wrong? They haven't tested yet, but they're just, I don't know, they're just feeling like either more tired, or maybe their vision's blurry, or I don't know, their functions in the gym aren't working. Like what are the signs?
That's a few. Yeah. So a lot of times people will have more frequent urination, especially people might notice in the night that they're getting up to go to the bathroom a lot more often. They might feel more thirsty, because what happens is, right, you're urinating more, so you're more thirsty from that. You might be more hungry. So like if your blood glucose isn't getting into the cell for energy, your body does not really know that you've eaten. And so you may feel more hungry even after you eat. You might feel more tired, like I talked about earlier, and just not even realize it. For some people, which this is more common in type 1 than 2, they may actually lose weight. Not usually in type 2, but in type 1, blurry vision. One time I had a client who, well, there's probably been more than one over the years, but I did have a client who he had different pairs of glasses that he wore based on what his blood glucose was. Now, that's not a good thing. I don't think it is, but that's what it messes with the tiny little capillaries in your eyes. You can have people, I've seen probably one of the biggest symptoms that people have before they ever know anything is they have what they call neuropathy, or they have that numbness and tingling in their like hands or feet. That often takes them to the doctor, who then, because of the symptom, may test their blood glucose. But that's a very frequent, like early on sort of thing. You may see people over the years, I've seen more than one person have frequent like kidney infections or urinary tract infections. And it's because when your glucose is high like that, it just presents the right atmosphere for infection. Same thing with, you might get a cut and it doesn't heal very well. All of those types of things.
That's huge. Hey, there's a lot of different things that can point you to that,
Yeah.
In terms of age, I don't know, just some people wave it off. Oh, I'm only 38, I'm fine. Or I'm only 40 something. Or, oh man, I'm 65. Yeah, I should take this seriously. Like, do people think if they're younger that they don't need any help? What are the things you think people think or hear that, are like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So like, right. So the average age of diagnosis is about 45 to 55 for type 2. That's the most common place you see it. And then as the age goes up, the prevalence increases, especially once you're over 65. So those are the big ones. But in reality, 20s to 40-year-olds are getting more, and even adolescents, like we talked about earlier. So I would say in general, for people who are younger, in general, I think a lot lot of times they do kind of blow it off because you're young. You think you're going to live forever kind of thing. It really depends on the individual and how they choose to address things when those are given, when you're told that, because it is a big thing to be told that you have diabetes. It's just sometimes I don't think that everyone, like if you don't have the education on it or like you didn't have family members on it, everybody reacts differently. I would say people that have family members, oftentimes, if they saw grandma lose her leg because she had poorly controlled diabetes, they may react in a different way than if they don't know anyone in their lives. I always say diabetes is not like one of like the hot button illness. Like you don't see a lot of billboards about diabetes and preventing diabetes. And I feel like it should be, right? It should be that thing because there's so many, the percentages are just skyrocketing. They say by the year, and I remember when the statistic came out, it seems so far away, but by the year 2050, that 1 out of 3 people will have type 2 diabetes, which is insane. I don't even know how the healthcare system can keep up with that because you have to remember that along with that is all the chronic conditions and those things all, living with diabetes is an expensive illness. So
what percentage of people right now have pre-diabetes? I think I've heard it's like the 30 or 40% of it.
I mean, it's out there because when you combine it with, I think right now, the two together, I'm going to have to look because I don't know what the 2026 number is. Let me see. But the two together, I know right now are at least at 50% of the population either have pre-diabetes or diabetes in terms of the sheer numbers of people.
And what's the conversion rate? Like what percentage of people with pre-diabetes within the next X number of years go on to have diabetes? I guess it's a pretty high rate, right?
It is. It's fairly significant. So the 2026 numbers are that 98 million U.S. adults age 18 or over have pre-diabetes. That's about 38% of adults is what it says. So yeah. And the worst part about that of all is that most of those people that have pre-diabetes don't know because again, they didn't have their glucose checked or no one communicated that to them. So they think that 80 to 90% of the people that do have diabetes or pre-diabetes rather don't know that they have it. So
I think it's true if you're not very heavy, if you're relatively young and you're not heavy,
yeah.
Why would you think you have a problem? Like I would think two people think, oh, that person's way overweight. Of course they have diabetes. I'm not. So I should be fine. Yeah, that's it.
Right. Exactly. No. And then for kids, the CDC estimates that 1 in 3 U.S. adolescents, so kids that are between 12 and 17 have prediabetes. That's a lot. That's a third of kids. Yeah. No, it's scary.
All right. So what new treatments or protocols are you seeing that are either here or coming that show a lot of promise to help people?
So I work over in the land of lifestyle change. I am not the expert on diabetes meds. I can tell you what I have seen that has been the biggest change. So when the majority of the time that I've been a dietitian and diabetes educator, party line always was you cannot reverse diabetes. But they now know that if you really drill down and like manage your stress and, the thing that I always promote is plant-based whole foods because that's what's been found to actually help reverse diabetes. Plant-based whole foods where it's naturally low in added fat and sugar, getting your exercise in, managing your stress, which is huge in this country. I think so. Stress is like killing everybody. And then like getting good sleep, because if you don't get good sleep, it's going to kick your cortisol level up. And those are the things that if you focus in on that, they've actually seen very, very good results in actually putting people into remission, diabetes remission, which was unheard of for the majority of the time that I've been a dietitian. So that to me is I guess I always want to say, I just want to empower people to know that you can make a difference, that you can change those things. And even if you're on medicine, it doesn't mean you're on medicine forever. I just think that so many people think that there's no hope. I've had people say that to me, like so-and-so, like grandma and my uncle and blah, blah, blah had diabetes and they all, had these horrible outcomes. I don't think it has to be that way.
Well, that's good. It's very good. So what's the first thing someone should do if either they test high or they're just not feeling like they used to and it falls under one of the things we spoke about,
Right.
What's the first step for people?
Well, I think, first of all, like you said, the very first step is if you're not feeling great and you know that you have a family history of diabetes or you haven't had your blood work checked. And like frequently I talk to people and they haven't had their blood work checked for 4 or 5 years. Go get your blood work checked because it could be something other than diabetes. So get your blood work checked, see what those numbers look like. If they are elevated, you need to have a conversation with your doctor about what are our next steps. And if you don't want to start immediately on medicine, and the first line always usually here in the US is metformin, if you don't want to start on medicine right away, like ask for that referral to see a dietitian and a diabetes educator, because most people have both of those things covered. They're able to see both a dietitian and take diabetes education, whether it's in classes or a one-on-one format. Even people in Medicare are reimbursed for that. So having those things where they can have things tailored to them, because we really need to know, like, what's your normal? What are your things that you're doing? And have somebody kind of guide them to the next step. Like, are you getting any exercise in? Like the one thing last year, one of the most interesting studies that I read was there was a study out of the Netherlands where if you did 10 squats an hour throughout the day, that it actually was as efficient as going on a 30-minute walk for lowering glucose.
Oh, wow.
So for my people that always say to me, I don't have time, I'm like, you got 10 seconds, do 10 squats or 20 seconds. However,
each cookie you eat, you got to do a squat. Each can of soda, while you're drinking, you got to do a squat.
There, maybe don't have the regular soda if you're going to do that, I would say, but yeah, or even like something as simple as doing small when it comes to what you eat, doing small changes. I used to have when I was working primarily only with people with diabetes, I would have this deal for the regular soda drinkers. Is I was always like, do you think? I know it depends on how many they're drinking, because some people may be drinking like 12 and somebody else may be drinking 2, but we would work on slowly like backing off the regular soda, because that's an easy first step to get the glucose down initially, and then working on those bigger rocks, like getting more veggies in. Or I'm a big fan of fiber, and the average American gets far less fiber. Like the goal for women is 25 grams a day, and the goal for men is 38. And on average, and I see this every day in my practice, the average that people have in the beginning is only about 10 to 12 grams of fiber. So that makes a huge difference. Plus, they did this study called the American Gut Project, where it showed that the healthiest people had the most diversity in plants. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. So just even trying to get more of that in. And sometimes I have this little 30 plant challenge handout that I'll give people so that it kind of gamifies it. So they're like checking it off. They're trying to get towards 30. Just those little tiny steps can make a huge difference in making blood glucose better and making them healthier overall as a person too. Because it's not just about the glucose number, it's about all of it. Because glucose, anywhere that it's elevated, it affects every single part of your body. So we want to make sure you're healthy overall.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Kathy, thanks so much for coming. And any 1 or 2 resources for listeners, wherever they're at, to help them further their understanding of what may be going on with them, diabetes. What do you recommend?
Yeah. So, I mean, the American Diabetes Association is a great reference. I think that it's a good first step, even if like you're just trying to figure out, well, do I have diabetes or pre-diabetes? They have a great, I think it's digital still. They have a great little quiz you can take to see what your risk of pre-diabetes is. So I think that is tremendous. And then they just have tons and tons of resources that anybody with diabetes, pre-diabetes, or caring for someone, because I think all the caretakers, right, of the world, that they need to know just as much as the person that's living with diabetes as well. That would be my number one resource that I would tell people to go to, is the American Diabetes Association.
Yeah, don't eat donuts in front of them.
Yeah, or you'll get smacked. No.
Well, very good, Kathy. Thank you so much. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.